Good evening, everyone. My name is Jane Pickering. I'm the Executive Director of the Harvard Museums of Science and Culture, a partnership that includes the Harvard Museum of Natural History, which is the sponsor of tonight's event, which is very exciting because we opened a new exhibit. And so that's always a wonderful feeling of opening something new and really cool. Anyway, I would just like to make a couple of announcements. Following the presentation, we do have a reception for museum members who are invited to join us on the third floor. And there will be museum staff outside to direct you. And the first plug of the evening, you will also be able to purchase Scott Miller's new book and get it signed by Scott himself, if you wish. And if you're not a member but would still like to join us for the reception, then please just see one of the members of staff. I would also, as I always do at these events, encourage you to pick up our program guide, which is on the table to my right. And if you haven't already joined one of our email lists, I also encourage you to do that as well. So, as I mentioned, tonight we're here to celebrate the opening of our new exhibit, Thoreau's Maine Woods, which features the beautiful photography. Those of us who've already had the opportunity to see it truly is stunning. That Scott Miller, who is here tonight to give a presentation, did. And the exhibit also commemorates the 150th anniversary of the publication of Thoreau's Maine Woods essays. Before I get on to that, I just also want to do a brief shout out to the exhibit staff who put together the exhibit, because I know several of them are sitting in the audience. And as you will see, it truly is a marvelous show, and so we owe them a lot of appreciation. I'd like to thank you for that. So Scott, who will tell the stories, but he has traversed the state of Maine for many years, retracing the footsteps that Henry David Thoreau took during his 3 trips in the 1840s and 50s. And like Thoreau, Scott worked, lived, and shared his experiences with the people and the traditions of the Penobscot Nation of northeastern Maine, who have lived and worked continuously in this region and the Wabanaki Territory for many hundreds of years. Both Thoreau's journey and Scott's journey would not have been possible nor been complete without the partnership and the generosity of the Penobscot. And we have 3 very special guests from the Penobscot Nation with us tonight. James Neptune, who is the museum coordinator for the Penobscot Nation. Dr. Darren Ranco, who is the chair of Native American Studies and associate professor of anthropology at the University of Maine, and also a Harvard graduate. We like those. And then James Eric Francis Sr., the director of cultural and historic preservation of the Penobscot Nation in Maine. Mr. Francis is also the Penobscot Nation historian and an authority on Thoreau's Maine Woods. And we are thrilled, that he, as an added treat to tonight's program, is going to give a short presentation that he has developed about the Penobscot, Thoreau's story, and this amazing region that we are focusing on tonight. I asked him if there was anything he wanted me to say, and I think he has some very thoughtful and stories that I have certainly heard and enjoyed, but I did want to say that he is currently enrolled in an intermediate Master of Fine Arts program at the University of Maine, so he too is a photographer as well as Scott. After Mr. Francis, I will then pop up here again and introduce Scott Miller. Thank you.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me okay? Even if I do this? You can still hear me? Great. So my name is James Eric Francis Sr., and I am the Director of Cultural and Historic Preservation for the Penobscot Nation. A job I've been doing for about 2 years, but prior to that I was the Penobscot Nation's tribal historian. A job that I've probably been doing all my life, but officially for the tribe for about 10 years. Now, I have a memory of the first time that I ever went home. I was 3 years old, and I was reminded of this memory just the other night as I came here crossing the Tobin Bridge. My mom had married a truck driver. My real dad is a truck driver, and they moved to southern New England, and at some point he cheated on her and she left him. And she took me, my brother, and my sister home. Now, this memory is very vibrant in my brain because it's attached to a song. Elton John's Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. And when this song comes on the radio, I'm transported back to being in a moving van, driving north to Maine. We're crossing the Tobin Bridge. It's night, and the Boston skyline is lit up like a Christmas tree. I was very young. I must have been 3 or 4. But every time I hear this song, I can even see my mother's lips singing the song, "You know you can't hold me forever," the line from the song. And so every time I'm transported back. And that's the first time I ever went home. Because it was from there that we moved to Oak Hill, place where James Neptune is from, just across the street from my grandmother's house, where those very early years I grew up. So I had a very strong sense of place growing up. Growing up on Indian Island, very small island, Oak Hill, just this side of that pond that you see. Grew up talking to elders, ran track, went to Old Town High School. And then after, I left to join the Air Force and was transported to a foreign landscape that some people call Wyoming. Very different from the place that I grew up, very different landscape. And I was actually homesick that 4 years that I spent there. I wasn't necessarily homesick for my family or for the tribe, but for the landscape. And just before I got out of the Air Force, my grandmother got very sick and she passed away. And while home, visiting her in the hospital, she had told me that I was given a gift and that with that gift came a responsibility. You know, all the stories that I grew up with from a variety of different elders, because as a youth I was very curious about the tribe's history. And so I had to find a way to give that back. And so I enrolled as a historian at the University of Maine, and I was taking a Native American Studies course, and we learned about the Trail of Tears. You know, this forcible removal of the Cherokee Nation from their homeland to a foreign landscape. You know, Wyoming fresh in my head. I was amazed at how these people could survive in that foreign landscape. It was so different from the one that they had generations upon generations of knowledge about. So as I walked across the campus of the University of Maine, heading to Hilltop where my dormitory was, I looked at a pine tree, and a moment of clarity or just took place, and I realized that I was standing in Penobscot ancestral territory. We were never removed. At that moment, it changed how I looked at the world. It changed the courses that I took in my subsequent years as a student, studying geology and geography, everything I could learn about Maine, I was there. Because ultimately, it was the landscape that my ancestors called home. So one of the things that I started reading was Henry David Thoreau's The Maine Woods. And as I read his first part of it, which was called Katahdin, I read about how he took the steamer from Boston or Concord up to Bangor and By page 6, he was standing on the shores just across from Indian Island and had this view. This is probably a little later. But I was amazed at what I was reading, because Thoreau sounded downright racist. And I was a myth. Let me just, from page 6, if you will. As if the tribe still had design upon life. He was assuming that we were just going to be wither away to nothing. In describing an Indian walking up the bank, very shabby, forlorn, cheerless look, being all backside and woodshed. Well, that's actually the houses. He says that politics are all a rage with them now. I even thought that a row of wigwams with a dance of powwow and a prisoner tortured at the stake would be more respectable than this. Boy, I was like, whew. The church, that's Rome's doing. So I started to delve a little bit further into kind of the Maine woods and trying to keep an open mind. And I realized that Thoreau wasn't actually racist at all. Naive, maybe. He had grown up in Concord, Mass, with his eyes to the ground, looking for arrowheads and other relics of long-gone Indian culture in his area. And when he came to Maine, that's what he was looking for. That noble savage, someone untouched by what is then American society. A relic, if you will. And he was actually really disappointed when he got to Indian Island, that he would have much rather seen a row of wigwams and someone tortured at the stake, because that would have been at least untouched, kind of pure Penobscots. So I'm kind of glad that I stuck with him, because that point of view allowed me to kind of not only delve into Thoreau as a person and kind of pick his brain, and realize that, this ideal of going there to find, quote unquote, an Indian kind of gets transformed into meaning men, true Penobscot men. Not only men, beyond being an Indian, but men. And men that, in the end, he not only respected but revered. So he goes on a journey himself beyond through the woods of Maine. He goes on a personal kind of enlightenment. One of the greatest things that I got from Thoreau was what his guides gave to him. Because ultimately, as a historian of the Penobscot Nation, it's those voices of Penobscot tribal members of the past that I hold with the most reverence and most dear to me. And so when you find someone like Thoreau who had guides, Penobscot guides, I pay close attention to what his guides had to say. And one of the things that they did was they shared with Thoreau Indian place names of different places. So the names, the ancient names of place. Thoreau actually said, the Indians stood nearer to wild nature than we. The wilds, the noblest quadrupeds, even the largest freshwater fishes, some of the wildest and noblest birds and the fairest flowers have actually receded as we advanced, and we have but the most distant knowledge of them. It was a new light when my guides gave me Indian names for things which I had only scientific ones before. In proportion as I understand the language, I saw them from a new point of view. A dictionary of the Indian language reveals another and a wholly new life to us. It reveals to me a life within a life, or rather a life without a life, as if we were treading the woods between our towns still, and yet can never tread in its trail. The Indian's earthly life was as far off from us as heaven is. Thoreau learned Indian names for things that he had only scientific ones before, and he saw them in a new light. I saw the landscape in a new light by reading The Maine Woods. And I learned about his guides. One of my favorite Penobscot characters in history, or people in history, is Joseph Aitken. He embodies so much that kind of encapsulates what it is to be Penobscot. He was born on Christmas Day in 1829, and we've had Christianity in our community for at least a few hundred years, early 1600s. And he dies on the 4th of July because we all hate America. I'm kidding. No, but we're a very patriotic tribe. So he really embodies that. He also, in addition to being Thoreau's guide, he was our last hereditary chief. So historically, if your father was chief, like Beshabes to Astaku, you would become chief. And this bloodline continued on up through Aitken's father's day. His name was John Aitken. And John Aitken's son, Joseph Aitken, certainly was in the running to become chief. But, like I said, and what Thoreau said, they were all arranged with politics. So about the time that Thoreau was there was a lot of politics going on within the tribe about this family who was in charge, and they wanted to get rid of them. They wanted new blood, so to speak. And Aitken ran. Joseph Aitken ran for chief. He would have been the last hereditary chief, and they had an election. He was elected anyways. So in addition to becoming the last hereditary chief, he was also our first elected chief. And this, you want to talk about a rage with politics, this furthered the flames and the fervor of this kind of dissent that took place. And the state intervened, and we had something called the Old Party, New Party that started to play. But I don't want to get into that too much. But Aitken, Thoreau was kind of disappointed with Aitken immediately because they took the stagecoach from Bangor and went to Greenville, Moosehead Lake. And Thoreau was upset, and he wrote in the Maine Woods that, my guide gave his seat up inside the coach to sit outside in the rain so a woman could sit inside the stagecoach outside of the rain. And Thoreau wrote, I really wanted to know what kind of man he was. And he's a man who gives his seat up to a woman in the rain. But he was disappointed that he didn't get to know him on the way up there. That was in 1853 on his trip to Chesuncook, was with Joseph Aitken. Now, Joseph Aitken dies on the 4th of July in a tragic accident. He was part of the log drive of John Ross's last load of logs coming down the Penobscot in 1870. And it's the 4th of July. Most of the crew is at Independence Day celebrations in a variety of different places. A skeleton crew and a rookie or an unskilled boatman in the front of the boat called Charles Prouty. Now, historical record says Charles's nickname was Dingbat Prouty, but we're not sure if that was a nickname he had at the time or that he received on this day. But he made a severe mistake, and the boat hit rocks broadside, and the river started to rip the boat apart just above what's called Grand Pitch Falls, which is a picture there near Millinocket, Maine. And the last time anyone saw Aitken alive, he was trying to save the rest of the crew, water up to his knees as they went down over the falls. They fished his body out of Shad Pond down below the next day. And it is said that they hung his boots on a pine knot of a tree nearby. According to Maine legend, those boots still hang there. I haven't gone out to look, but I'm going to assume that they're still there. It just makes a better story. But so he dies a hero in Maine history. In 1957, he hires Joe Polis, which is down here in the corner. Now, This was the longest journey that Thoreau took, a few weeks in the woods with Joe, and pretty much circumnavigates where Katahdin is here, going into Moosehead Lake and heading up into the Allagash and then down the east branch of the Penobscot to the main branch of the Penobscot, and came right down the river right next to Indian Island, a place where he had hired Polis from just a short time earlier. And in the Maine woods, Thoreau writes, as we drew near Old Town, I asked Polis if he was not glad to get home again. But there's no relenting to his wildness, and he said, it makes no difference to me where I am. Such is the Indian's pretense always. It didn't make any difference to him. He was always at home. He knew that landscape, that vast landscape that he took Thoreau on like the back of his hand. There were several places that Polis knew so well that he was checking traps and ensuring that there was food available to them. In Ubazukas, they stayed at Polis's camp. So it was this ideal that it wasn't, home was an Indian Island. You know, like you take a guest through to your dining room and your living room and show them the bedrooms of your home. That's all Polis was doing. This is our ancestral homeland. And it doesn't matter to him where we are. Now, one of the things about place names, and I just want to share one little thing. From place names, you get a geologic or geographic description of place. These are road markers. We were a mobile people, using birch bark canoes to travel the waterways in a sort of a seasonal round to go get food. It wasn't this nomadic existence where we're kind of bumping through the woods and, oh, a berry bush we eat today. It was a sophistication of the landscape that we knew where that berry bush was. We knew when those berries would be ripe. We knew how to get there. And we knew if we burned the berry bush that it would have or whatever the berry bush, it would have a more plentiful bounty next year. So it was a very sophisticated knowledge of a vast landscape. And so the place names show us this through these geographic or geologic descriptions. Passadumkeag, above the gravel bar, you know. Or they're sometimes natural resource based. Birch Stream, Hemlock Island, all ancient names. Or Bassagassawakeg, the place where we speared sturgeon by torchlight. So a very specific activity at a very specific place. So place names like offer us this window into the past of how our ancestors saw the landscape. And Thoreau provides us with some of that. Sometimes we find legends that are embedded in the landscape and kind of reinforce these first two. And in closing, I'm going to share one of these legends. Glooskap, a cultural hero. His job was to teach the people different things. And on this particular day, he was teaching people how to hunt moose. He's at Moosehead Lake in Maine, because that's a really cool place to be. And he sees a cow moose and a calf come out of the forest. And he bends down to the ground, and he picks up a stone, and he fashions it to a stick. And he notches the stick into a bow, and he shoots the cow moose, the mommy moose, dead. Not only does she die, she turns to stone. Now, in the Maine woods, as Polis and Thoreau are paddling the length of Moosehead Lake, Thoreau writes that this dark mountain that rises before us, my guide tells me, was anciently a cow moose. And Polis was right. Because not only did she turn into stone, she became Mount Kineo, which rises just up out of Moosehead Lake. So Mount Kineo is the cow moose. Now, this ain't like Medusa. She just doesn't like turn to stone. She didn't turn into just any stone. She turned into that stone that he picked up off the ground and fashioned to a stick. Kineo is one of the largest repositories in New England for a stone that's perfect for making arrowheads. And this is what the story tells us, that this is where you go for that stone. So Kineo fell site is found all over New England. Indians for hundreds of miles would travel there to quarry the cow moose. Now, the calf gets all excited, knocks over a kettle that Gluskop had ready to cook the moose in, and it becomes what we know today. It's Little Spencer Mountain today, but it was known as the Kettle Mountain. And in fact, there's a town called Cocadjo, which is it's a anglicized version of a word that means the kettle in our language. Gluskop takes his backpack off and throws it, and it becomes Big Spencer Mountain. Now, because this story kind of points to resources, I've often wondered if Big Spencer Mountain had a lot of brown ash, the tree to make baskets from, because he had thrown his pack basket there. There's no way ever to find out historically if that was the case. But the calf moose runs off, and Gluskop with his snowshoes on and his dog in tow, and this sculpture of Madakawando is going to sit in for Gluskop. And they chase the moose all the way across the landscape to Penobscot Bay, where the moose swims across the bay, and Gluskop jumps over the bay with his snowshoes on, and he lands in a place called Dice Head, which is right here at the tip of Castine. And they said he landed with such force that his snowshoes made marks on the rocks. It's pretty powerful. And it's from here that he gets the upper hand and kills the moose. Now, reading Fanny Hardy Ekstrom histories of the tribe, she was a historian from Brewer, Maine. She said, oh, but white people have walked on the rocks and you can't tell there was snowshoes there. Well, I went there, and it's a picture of Dice Head. And it's the gray granite that's predominant in Penobscot Bay, and it has crisscrossing patterns of this white quartzite through it. Now, I told you I took geology lessons, and I know geologically how this happens. And people often ask me, okay, you got the story that tells you these are Gluskop's, the web pattern from his snowshoes, and which do you believe? And it really doesn't matter, because when I stepped down upon that rock and saw this pattern on the rock, I knew I was in the place that they were talking about. And that's the point of the place, that it's a travel marker. It becomes this marker on the landscape that will never change. And this is where Gluskop landed. From there, Gluskop guts the moose and takes the entrails and throws them to his dog. It's traditional to throw the entrails to the dog. You never give the dog the moose meat, because the dog has to sniff out the meat, and if he gets a sweet meat from the flesh, he will lose his ability to smell. And so you give him the entrails. And so he throws the entrails to the dog, and they land on an island called Islesboro. This is the entrails at Islesboro. Very large quartzite rock. And when we went to take this picture, I was with an anthropologist called Bill Haviland, and we get in his boat, and he says, you see that white dot over there? And I was like, okay, yeah. He goes, okay, just keep that in mind. I thought he was taking me to some mansion that he liked, way across we were clear across the bay. And as we got closer and closer, that white dot got brighter and brighter, and it was this rock. And it was an overcast day. It wasn't like it was beaming sun. And it became a little beacon for us to follow. Also on the landscape there is the liver. As I said, within the landscape of Penobscot Bay, there's a lot of gray granite. This rock is brownish red. It's unlike any other rock. It's very identifiable within Penobscot Bay as something distinct and different. And this is Usquan, it's called, the liver. It's the moose liver. So Gluskop is gutting and leaving the rump, which becomes Cape Rozier, a mountain just across from Castine. So he's leaving these body parts all over Penobscot Bay. Why? Taken collectively, snowshoes, entrails, rump, liver. This was a bird that was pecked on the rock. It's part of another talk I do. Just borrowed the slide. But these are travel markers. This whole story outlines a travel pattern. That little white dot that we could see from across the bay is just a couple 100 feet north of a portage that'll take you across this island. It was a beacon. It was something to say, follow that light. And likewise, Blind Cove, from the liver, you can make out there's a cove here, there was a portage to go here, and then further up the river. And a place where it was treacherous and very difficult to navigate, place names offered a road map. And Thoreau offered us many place names to get that window into the past, to see how my ancestors saw the landscape. Gave us a sense of place. I just want to close with a very poignant quote from a Chinese geographer that kind of helped me kind of define how I look at the world. Yifu Tuan, very short little formula, space plus culture equals place. So that people, that culture piece, can take a space and make it a place and give us a sense of place, a sense of history, and a sense of home. So thank you very much. Okay. Do you need the dongle?
No, I have one.
Okay. Do you call it a dongle?
Can you do a little song and dance for a little bit?
Yeah, I'm going to do a song and dance while they change the...
Very good.
But actually what I'm going to introduce Scott while he's busy with his... So the first thing is to say that Scott is absolutely no stranger to the Harvard Museum of Natural History. He previously partnered with the museum to create a very successful traveling exhibition, Thoreau's Walden, A Journey in Photographs by Scott Miller, which was launched at the H&NH in 2005, and since that time has been traveling and is still traveling, and it's been to science and art museums and botanical centers from coast to coast, including California, Indiana, Ohio, Arkansas, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and elsewhere here in Massachusetts. So it's really was a pleasure for us to be working with Scott again. But in addition to that exhibit, his photography has been featured in publications and books, including American West Magazine and the National Park Service's resource study of Walden Pond and Woods. Scott co-owns the Sun to Moon Gallery in Dallas, Texas, with his wife Marilyn, who is also here. You'll get a chance to meet with her.
Thanks.
And he is here tonight to talk about his 7-year project photographing northeastern Maine and combining those images with text from Thoreau's The Maine Woods. And that project resulted in his new book, The Maine Woods, A Photographic Journey Through an American Wilderness, which has just been published by Levenger Books and, as I think I mentioned earlier, is available for sale tonight. And he'll sign it. And as part of his presentation this evening, he is going to show us his new short documentary about the making of that book called The Unexpected Journey. So Scott, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Look forward to hearing.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. And hold on. Okay. And the reason what's brought me here tonight is this journey I've been on for the last 7 years to do an illustrated edition of Henry David Thoreau's The Maine Woods. It is published, by Levenger Press, as she said. This is the book. I'm very proud of it. I'm very thankful for Levenger Press because books like this that have lots of color photography and very well done are fewer and fewer between. And I don't know if they're a dying breed, but they we need help. So hopefully you see this. But along with this, this is my second exhibition here, and I'm very proud of what the staff has done here. And hopefully most of you'll be able to come up afterwards. And also, James, Francis, you're a tough act to follow wherever you are. But I'm going to do my best. And what I hope to do in the next 35 or 40 minutes is give you just a little bit of the sense of the journey that I've been on, also the journey that Thoreau was on. And I'll touch a little bit. I obviously come from a very different perspective than James Francis or James Neptune and the other gentleman I met from University of Maine earlier tonight. But as I read and reread the Maine Woods and went up to the Maine Woods and so forth, it became very apparent how important the Penobscot connection was. But we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. I am also, in addition to being a photographer, I'm a videographer. And for the last 20 years or so, I've carried about a 50-pound backpack into wherever I go to photograph. Sometimes it's miles into the wilderness. As if that wasn't heavy enough, I decided about 20 years ago that I wanted to carry a video camera, and it was always on my back. So this is my fifth book, but it's the first book that I've done that I documented my journey from beginning to end in high definition. So a lot of what I'm going to show you this evening will be the result of that. But what I'd like to show you first, for the last several books I've done, when you go to a movie theater, you'll often see what they call trailers for upcoming things. And so I've always tried to put little short 2 or 3 minute trailers on the internet ahead, giving people an idea about the book and what's coming. And so I'm going to show you a piece of one. I've edited out the back because it actually has information I'm going to talk about later. But I also play it because one of the things I'd like to get across tonight is that in the Maine Woods, I also saw different sides of Henry David Thoreau than I think a lot of people are used to. And this first one will show, I think, is a little bit of his humorous side. And so I'm just going to play this short video trailer for you. In the book The Maine Woods, Thoreau describes the landscape as all mossy and moosey, a very appropriate description, especially in the forest that's been untouched, like it is here. As you can see, it's very, very mossy here. Other places I've been to have been very, very moosey. Sometimes they've been moosey and mossy, or mossy and moosey. And in other areas, it's very ferny. And sometimes mossy. And sometimes moosey. So that's a little video preview, and it ends with the loons. And first of all, how many people have been up to Maine and seen a loon? Just out of curiosity. Wow, that's a lot. I think you'd probably agree it's one of the most magical things in the world to hear loons. But I have this quote from Thoreau in the book, and again, this is he is always describing what he's seeing so well, and that's one thing that's so great about this book. It's 150 years ago, but his descriptions really give you an idea of the way it was. But it's not all, people think he's all serious all the time, and he's not. And I think, with this particular quote, it kind of gives you an idea. By the way, there is a point in the second line. If anybody, when we get to that, would like to do that call for me, that would be wonderful. But he says, this is of the loon. I do not mean its laugh, but its looning is a long-drawn call, as it were, sometimes singularly human to my ear. Anybody? Very good. Whoa! Hey! Very good. Can you come on the road with me? like the howling of a man on a very high key, having thrown his voice into his head. Oops, sorry, I missed something there. Oh, this is a finely oiled machine I've got here. Sorry. I'm so sorry. Back up. Okay. Sorry. Now, what's interesting is in this, Thoreau actually taught me something. I didn't know this. He talks about a laugh, and then he talks about looning, and they are distinctly different calls. And the end of the video that preceded this is what people commonly refer to as the laugh. As I later came to know, it's really the loon saying, they're here, they're on the lake, and watch out for them. You know? Whereas what you just heard now is the looning, and I've been told by some historians that this is actually a term that Thoreau coined here, is really them talking to each other. But he went on to say, I have heard a sound exactly like it when breathing heavily through my own nostrils, half awake at 10 at night, suggesting my affinity to the loon, as if its language were but a dialect of my own after all. So he's not all serious, you know, but he is observing. One thing I like to point out to people too is that on these Mainwood journeys, and as James said earlier, they describe 3 trips. It's broken into 3 chapters or essays, but he covered a really wide geographic area. And the northern Maine, there's an area that they call the UT, which stands for the Unorganized Territories, which is approximately 8 to 10 million acres large, and there's virtually 8 to 10,000 maybe permanent inhabitants, and no towns. That's now, but back in his day, it really was a wilderness. Now, that's a relative term. To his Penobscot guides, it was their home, like James Francis had talked to. But to Henry David Thoreau, or to probably most of us coming out, it was a wilderness. So what I'd like to do next is this is the short documentary that was alluded to earlier. And in about 14 minutes, I'm going to try to give you a sense of my journey, Thoreau's journey, and show you, the journey. The photographs that are in the book are just the ones that ended up in there, but there's many stories and adventures behind them. I have a confession to make. I have been carrying on a long-time affair, and my wife approves. That's because the affair is with the Northwoods of Maine that Henry David Thoreau wrote about so eloquently a century and a half ago in the classic book, The Maine Woods. When I started work on a Maine Woods book in 2006, the plan was to spend 2 years photographing. 2 years turned into a 7-year journey of discovery, photographing and learning about the land, the people, and the rich history of Maine's North Woods. The resulting book, Thoreau, The Maine Woods, A Photographic Journey Through an American Wilderness, published by Levenger Press, is better for that unexpected journey. The book marries 88 color photographs with the words of Henry David Thoreau as he recounts 3 expeditions to the Maine woods from 1846 to 1857. The 3 chapters or essays from the Maine woods, originally published in 1864, are included unabridged. Some of the photographs in the book were created as recently as October 2012, and one as far back as October 2002. I wanted to experience the places that Thoreau wrote about in person, get a feel for them, and artistically interpret them in my own way. I photographed in all seasons, cutting a wide geographic swath from Bangor in the south to Fort Kent in the north, and many points in between, with emphasis on areas that Thoreau either explored or wrote about in the Maine woods. Thousands of photographs were taken in the process. The 88 photographs that made the final cut and appear on the pages of the book were very carefully selected and placed to enhance the reading experience. When I submitted the images for the book to my editor, she loved them mostly. I could tell that a few of the photographs took her slightly aback, as the images were not scenes that Thoreau could have witnessed in his day or written about. Instead, they were from places he visited and wrote about, but with a modern-day twist, and that was the point. Maine's North Woods have not existed in a vacuum since Thoreau's day, and I wanted some of the photographs to reflect that. While many of the photographs in the book are reminiscent of things Thoreau might well have seen, some, such as the steam locomotive gear and wheel photographed near the shoreline of Eagle Lake, allude to history in the Maine woods since his time. Other photographs, such as the floatplane on Abagesus Lake, depict a very modern landscape, but also show a scene from the same geographic location visited and described by Thoreau in the book. I was able to add a visual perspective to the book that Thoreau could only have dreamed of: aerial photographs. They add a unique perspective to the book and were made possible by a collaboration with Lighthawk, a nonprofit volunteer pilot organization. Having previously illustrated editions of Thoreau's Walden and Cape Cod, I found the Maine woods by far the most challenging of his books to illustrate. Not only did he explore a wide geographic area on the 3 trips, but many of the places he visited and described in the book were remote and are still challenging to locate and access even today. The Maine woods is often described as one of Thoreau's excursion books. One definition of excursion is a usually short journey made for pleasure, an outing. But the experiences described in the Maine woods are much more than that. Exploration is a much more fitting term, defined as the action of traveling in or through an unfamiliar area in order to learn about it. This book is about 3 trips into a largely unknown area on a journey of geographic and personal discovery. It's been said that Thoreau wasn't much of an outdoorsman, but you cannot read the Maine woods without realizing that these were serious outdoor adventures. They were not comfortable outings, and conditions at times were downright miserable. Grumpy. Along the east and west branches of the Penobscot River, there were no towns, no roads, and very few people. The rivers are still largely free-flowing today, and in many cases similar to what Thoreau saw, but the forest has changed dramatically. The largely virgin forest that Thoreau described is long gone, having been cut and replanted for generations. The Northwoods of Maine are still a wild place in many respects, and a mostly beautiful place, with hardy, hardworking people, a rich history, and an abundance of wildlife. The Maine Woods is Thoreau's most adventurous book, revealing the explorer and adventurer in him, and someone not afraid to step out of his comfort zone. In the end, his Maine Woods experiences affected him greatly. Unfortunately, Thoreau did not live to see the Maine Woods published. He was working on the final details for his Maine Woods book in the closing months of his life, and his last intelligible words before passing away in 1862 were moose and Indians. Maine was definitely on his mind to the very end. Thoreau biographer Robert D. Richardson credits the Chassuncook chapter, in which Thoreau calls for the creation of national preserves, to be one of the founding statements of the conservation movement, and not only our earliest, but also our sanest, most balanced call for the preservation of the wilderness. As the future of the Maine Woods is discussed and planned, including a proposal to create a new national park in the area, it's my hope that reading this book may help provide a greater understanding of both the past and the present, and be helpful in the process of creating a balanced approach on the path to a bright future. It's worth knowing about the Maine Woods that were and the Maine Woods that are, and it's my hope that this book gives you rewarding glimpses into both. Traveling to the Maine Woods was a huge adventure in Thoreau's day, and it's still an adventure today, in some ways the same, and in other ways different. Thoreau's The Maine Woods was relevant in his time, and it's still relevant today. Thoreau once wrote, "What I began by reading, I must finish by acting." I am proud to be associated with this new edition, and hope you'll read the book, enjoy the photographs, and maybe even be inspired to undertake your own journey of discovery. Thoreau described it wonderfully with words, and I can convey it better through photographs and video, so let's experience a little more of Thoreau's Maine Woods. I'm standing right now in Thoreau Park, which is in Greenville on the south side of Moosehead Lake. It's from this point right behind me in 1853 and 1857 that Henry David Thoreau departed on two of his three Maine Woods journeys. In 1853, he left here in a steamship, traveling the entire 35 miles up to the Northeast Carry. In his 1857 trip, he departed here with his party, which included Penobscot guide Joe Polis, on a birch bark canoe, and they paddled the entire length of Moosehead Lake, stopping on the way to overnight at Mount Kineo. They spent the night at Mount Kineo and ended up climbing to the top of the mountain to see the incredible view all around. Mount Kineo dominates this part of Moosehead Lake. We've had a wicked winter storm overnight. Howling winds, lots of snow, huge drifts. I still get cold watching this part. So even though Thoreau, he didn't go there in the wintertime, I still wanted to experience it. Although he did talk to his Penobscot guides, and at one point, I forget which one it was, but talks about in the wintertime that they could just walk right across the lake, so they could go places a lot quicker. Also, the quote in there about, he was talking about Mount Katahdin. It is a cloud factory. I mean, how appropriate was that description? And you could see that. But so there you have it. My 7 years and 14 minutes. Thank you. So I've got a few other things. I'm going to skip through a few of these slides, pretty quickly to keep the time up so we can get upstairs and enjoy the exhibition. But just very quickly, he did three trips. The first one was in 1846. Something that's interesting about this time, August 31st to September 11th. Does anybody know where he was living at the time in 1846? Walden Pond, exactly. He was living at Walden Pond, and it was the second year there. He didn't say anything about it in the book. He just says, at the end of the book he says, and the second year was much the same as the first year. Well, that was a little bit of a fib. But as James Francis had said earlier, that first trip, his main goal was to climb Mount Katahdin, and actually got very close to the top twice, went up 2 days in a row. Both times, by the way, he left his other friends and so forth, could not keep up with him, including the other rivermen he had with him. And the mountain had only been climbed by white men or European for the first time in the early 1800s, and this is like the fifth or sixth recorded ascent of Mount Katahdin. Now, he didn't get quite to the top, but it's so close that it's hard to quarrel. So again, part of my point is that there was a big adventure side to him. One thing I would like to give credit where credit's due to, this is a book it's called The Wildest Country, A Guide to Thoreau's Maine by J. Parker Hoover. And I don't know how long ago it was, 15 or 20 years ago, but he he made it a point to go and try to find, went by canoe and so forth, and tried to find every place that Thoreau went, and his guides, identifying as many campgrounds and so forth. And so if somebody's, really looking, I mean, you can read the book and you can kind of figure out places, but this is a wonderful book if you're really trying, to find out, and it was very helpful to me. The second trip was in 1853. They started from where you saw me in Moosehead Lake. It was a couple weeks, and he had Joseph Attian as a guide. And they went up to, as far as Chesuncook, which is an interesting place in itself. And then the one I'll dwell on just a little bit longer is his 1857 itinerary, which was the longest by far. This was, I think, almost 2.5 weeks. So it was a long way. And when you look at that map over there, especially those of you who know Maine, starting in Bangor and going up, I mean, look how far. They went as far as Eagle Lake, then came over. They went up the west branch of the Penobscot, and ended up coming down the east branch. I mean, that is quite an undertaking. I mean, even to do that today, there's probably very few people that have done it. So, and he did spend time with his guide Joe Polis, and one of the things that impressed me about the book is from my point of view, I see an evolution of Thoreau's thinking about the Penobscot Nation. And it was, like James Francis said earlier, starting out, very kind of naive, which was, a lot of people were in that day, but he really did try to engage. So I found that, a very interesting thing. In the Chesuncook chapter, again, here's partly reporting what he saw, but I think, again, it's a sense of humor. But they were as bad then as they are now. Someone earlier up asked me about whether they were in his time. We have black flies, we have no-see-ums, we have all that now, and yes, they were. He describes them and they were his nemesis then, and they are our nemesis now. Although I gave a lecture the other night and said, maybe they're up there to keep more people from coming up to northern Maine. And after the lecture, a gentleman who's a friend of mine from Maine got up and said, well, I've got to make a correction. They're actually there for a reason, because the trout eat them and so forth and so on. So they're a big part of the ecosystem, so we need all of them. So they're a necessary part of that. Another thing, I could not do my journey without finding out more about the Penobscot Nation. And I did spend several visits with James Neptune at the museum, and appreciate his time and all that he shared with me. And several of the photographs that I took, he was very kind to let me look at some of the items in here. And just real quickly, there's a couple items here. One is the census from March of 1865. And it's interesting because if you look down at the bottom, you'll actually see Joseph Attian, who was his guide, listed there. So, I mean, I just thought it was sitting out there for me to see when I went. I thought it was kind of a sign. And the other thing is this beautiful example of a birch bark bowl. And in the last chapter, he asked Joe Polis, his guide, if he could make him a bowl of birch bark, and he did. So I would encourage people, to go visit the Penobscot Nation Museum. It's a wonderful repository of great information, and James loves to talk about history there. The next thing, I was also talking to someone earlier, and they were asking me if I'm a wildlife photographer, and I'm not a wildlife photographer by trade, because I shoot very large format equipment, and so it necessitates slower shutter speeds, being on a tripod. But sometimes, things happen, and in this case, it's called, moose serendipity. And I'm going to show you next is a video. This was out at one of the deadwaters on the east branch of the Penobscot River one morning, and I'd gone out there to photograph the beautiful sunrise, but it was cloudy. But you see, all of a sudden, I'm out there, and lo and behold, here comes this nice young moose out. And not only did the moose come out, but the moose came. At a certain point, she looks and she sees me, and she says, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm just here having fun." And so then she kind of ignored me, but she struck a perfect pose. And actually, I don't know if I can hear the audio out there. Oh, well, thank you. The audio's been down. That was kind of driving. There was audio there, but you could actually hear the moment that I clicked at the shutter, and then a few seconds later, she turned around and she was gone. But in that time, I was prepared. I saw that, and so I had enough time to set up at a really long lens. And thank goodness for her, she stood perfectly still to get this picture that's in the book, and it's one of my favorite, and that's why I call it Moose Serendipity. Because if I could have paid ahead of time to say, okay, I'm going to be out here this morning, and I'll pay you, $20 if you can get a moose to come stand right there. I love the photo, but what if she hadn't been there? It's still nice, but I like it with her a lot better. So moving forward, I'm going to try to close out in just a second, but here's another example of Thoreau, describing what he's seeing, but also I think a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, where he says, generally speaking, a howling wilderness does not howl. It is the imagination of the traveler that does the howling. And so in the case, when he was out there on some of these dark nights and things were going on, he was in the wilderness, whereas Joe Polis was, you're in my backyard, or my living room, as James said earlier. And how many of you knew that Henry David Thoreau was a fashion expert? Anybody out there? He was actually a fashion expert. And in the book, he writes, red flannel shirts should be worn in the woods, if only for a fine contrast, which this color makes with the evergreens in the water. So he was he was a fashionista. Who knew? Works pretty good. And he's right, it's a nice contrast. So in 32 minutes or less, I've taken you as much as I can on my adventure. We'll continue in a few minutes upstairs, and I look forward to meeting and talking to people, hopefully signing copies of this beautiful book by Levenger Press. But I'm going to leave you now, hopefully inspired to, if you've read the book, reread it. If you haven't read the book, read it. But inspiration is my goal here, and so I thank you all for coming. And this is about what this is. It's about a 5-minute piece, and this is all stills, and a lot of them are in the book, and a lot aren't. So I'm trying to give people that came out today, you kind of get extra insight into the book, and you see things that people that see the exhibition or just the book won't see. Thank you to the Harvard Museum of Natural History. Thank you all for coming. And I have to give a shout out to Harvard graduate of 1837, Henry David Thoreau, for giving us so much to work with. And see you all upstairs. Thanks.